Ladies and gentlemen, and this is Byzantine Empire, Justinian and Theodora, the reforms of Justinian, Extra History Part 2, channel Extra Credits. Yes, this is about the reforms of Justinian. So I guess this is where they're going to talk about in detail about how Justinian, wrote all the laws that we use today. Obviously, he didn't wrote it himself, probably. I don't know. It would be badass if he did. But yeah, we're going to see, if I know extra credits, we're going to see the details of how he did it and things like that. How many episodes are there? There's 4. Usually there are 4, right? So we might be in the, I guess the middle of this series. But it could be more. I don't know. Since this is really old, the setup might have been different. But yeah, I hope there are more because this topic needs a lot of, parts basically, if you're going to go into detail. But yeah, Justinian, basically the only big name we know of during the late Roman Empire because of he was the only one. In Byzantine Empire, he was the only one who reached the peak, the only one who brought back the old Roman, areas basically. At one point, he was like almost, or maybe he took all of them. I don't remember exactly, but almost all of the areas that Roman Empire had. That is bad as shit. But then the plague hit, and we know what happened. So let's watch it.
Last time, we saw the Emperor Justin rise from a peasant pig farmer with a little help from his nephew Justinian. Today, we'll see what happens when power changes hands and Justinian becomes sole ruler of Rome. Turns out, a lot happens. Upon coming into his own, Justinian bursts into a flurry of action, nearly unparalleled in history. He reformed almost every aspect of the empire, trying to fix 1,000 years of bureaucracy and neglect. But he didn't do it alone. He elevated a cast of some of the most talented, most diligent men in the history of the empire to attack all the things he saw wrong with the Imperium. Unfortunately, these brilliant, hard-working servants of the empire were also some of the most corrupt, quirky, and colorful characters the empire would ever see. So today, we're just going to work through Justinian's reforms by introducing you to these characters and what they did. First off, Justinian was a big spender. He wanted to build up the military, increase infrastructure, create monumental public works, and throw lavish games. But to do all this, he needed coin. And one of the problems...
his predecessors were kind of hoarder in a way of coins, right? If I remember correctly. So obviously, he's one of those people you have to spend the money to make money, which is kind of true. If you know what you're doing, and if you spend a grand amount of money for your empire, and if you know what you're doing, eventually it will have a grand returns. It was the case with the Justinians. He was smart there. And I like how he basically just, as soon as he came to power, it's change everything. And he's surrounded by such a corrupt people that even the people he found that he thinks would help, fix all this are themselves corrupt. It's can I even find somebody who's not corrupt here?
Roman Empire struggled with, from its inception, one of the problems that helped bring down the West and had almost brought down the East was tax collection. The rich would avoid their taxes, and the poor couldn't pay. And this just would not fly for Justinian. So he brought in John the Cappadocian. I mean, he even sounds like a mobster.
Oh my god, how close that is in today's world, right? No big companies pays taxes. Amazon don't pay taxes, Google don't pay taxes. They, find some loopholes, changes their office here and there, and just in the end doesn't pay any income tax. Income tax, right? Of course, they're going to pay sales tax and everything, but they don't pay any income tax. That's just fucked up. That's the same shit that happened with the Byzantine Empire.
Sure, doesn't he? This guy, John the Cappadocian, totally overhauled the tax system in the empire. He moved tax collection out of the hands of local officials. He crushed corruption within the ranks of the tax collectors, and one of his less popular reforms, at least with some segments of society, was torturing rich people until they paid their taxes.
What?
Of course, he was also a debauched glutton who skimmed from the taxes to feed his own perversions. Reports abound of his greed, his sexual appetite, and his boorish, slave-like treatment of his staff. Now, of course, many of these are exaggerations. After all, nobody likes the tax man, and being a more efficient tax collector probably isn't going to win you a glorious place in contemporary histories. But there are enough of these reports that I think we can assume this guy was likely running a very whistle-clean tax administration while shaking people down and engaging in some Baron Harkonnen-like good times himself. With the money he needed taken well care of, Justinian also attacked the second problem of the empire, the legal code. For 1,000 years, laws had been added, changed, and overturned without anybody really collating them, rationalizing them, or really putting them together in any way that wasn't contradictory. At this point, a lot of them just plain didn't make sense. This meant that the law courts had become clogged, corruption was rampant, and justice through the legal
You
system
mean the laws that tells you how to make hairstyle, which hairstyle is permissible, how to dress, that kind of laws?
was simply
That's
not available
interesting.
for most people. Justinian planned to end this, and so he brought in Tribonian. Tribonian was one of the most brilliant legal minds of all time. In 14 months, he untangled a millennium of Roman law and had a new law code ready to publish. Then he compressed 1,500 existing books of legal decisions down to a mere 50-book set, making the law
What?
comprehensible and approachable. With Justinian's help, he then had these books ruled to supersede all previous legal decisions, so that all lawyers and judges were working from the same law.
Okay, did he say 1500? What the fuck? How is general public supposed to know these laws? I'm not saying that we know our laws, just all of them. But still, in this time, at least in our world, we think that most laws, like at least 99% of the laws, based on common sense. So we just use our common sense and just assume that this can be legal or something like that. In around this time, like he said, lots of ridiculous laws were there, right? So how is common people supposed to know which is the law, which is not, and am I breaking any law or not, if that many laws are written down, that many books?
He rounded out these mind-boggling feats by writing an accessible textbook for all future lawyers to learn from, and together, these books form the Corpus Juris Civilis, the work that today's civil law is founded on. Of course, Tribonian was also an unabashed pagan, throwing
is the one
sacrilegious
who-
parties
okay.
and feasts even as Justinian was ostensibly cracking down on paganism. He was also utterly corrupt, or as one author once put it, every day he repealed or enacted some law at the instance of people who purchased this from him. Otherwise, of course, he was known for being good-natured, diplomatic, and only a little bit of a fop. With the Herculean task of reforming the entire canon of Roman law safely in the hands of perhaps the only man in history who might actually be up to the challenge, Justinian could finally turn his eye on military affairs. Justinian dreamed of reconquering the West, of reuniting and recreating an empire that had only fallen some 50 years before. He dreamed of restoring Rome. But at the time, the Romans were being kicked around by the Sassanid Persians all across the southern half of the empire. Before Justinian could turn his eye west, he had to stop the Persians from taking over what empire there was left. And for this, he had one of the best generals
Belisarius?
history has ever produced. A man easily the rival of Napoleon or Alexander, though his name's not so well known.
Oh, yeah, that's-
A man named Belisarius. From an early
Chad
age,
is
Justinian
coming.
recognized this man's brilliance, and by the time Belisarius was 25, he was Magister Militum, or theater commander of the East. But to talk about Belisarius, we have to talk about the Battle of Dara. At this point, Roman armies had suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of the Persians. The situation looked hopeless. Belisarius had been ordered to gather together whatever troops he can and hold the town of Dara, a small fortress town that guarded the entrance to Anatolia. If the Sassanid army got past there, they'd be in the heart of the empire. Envoys were sent from the imperial court to sue for peace, but the Persian king would have none of it. His army moved toward Dara. Reports start coming in of the strength of the Persian army. 50...
By the way, if there is any time where there's a literal army, if they get past just one town and goes to literal the heart of the empire, which means the enemy is at the gate, basically, that would make the gate, right? So Justinian is doing all these reforms, changing laws and shit, while enemy is literally at the gate. I mean, you really need to process this, right? In any time, people are like, oh, this is not the time for this shit. We need to think about Persians first. Because if they get past Dara, we are fucked. No, let's do the reforms. Let's talk about laws and shit. This is ridiculous, man.
50,000 men. 50,000. Belisarius looked to his troops, standing on the walls of his desert border fort. 25,000 men. Belisarius wanted to hole up, to fight from behind these walls. It was the only way they'd have a chance against an army twice their size. But he knew that if he did that, the Persians would just go around him. Behind him was nothing but farmers in their fields and priests in their churches. No, he had to stop them here, so he prepared to fight. A messenger galloped up from the Persians and handed him a note. It was from the enemy commander. It said, "Prepare me a bath, for tomorrow I shall bathe in this fortress." Belisarius ordered his men to dig. The next day, the armies lined up for battle. The massive Persian army with their infantry in the center and the famed immortals on the wings. The Byzantine army lined up across from it, with their infantry anchoring the center behind a great trench they had dug on Belisarius' command, with heavy cavalry on the wings, lighter cavalry in reserve, and a small force of Huns hidden behind a hill. The Persian cavalry charged. The wings were a whirling melee of horses and men. But the center, the infantry holding the Byzantine center, just stood there behind their trench. The Persian commander faltered. Even with his numbers, he didn't want to charge his infantry over that trench. His cavalry were doing well. He would let them win the day. Once they'd routed the Roman cavalry, they could circle behind the infantry and negate Belisarius' improvised defense. And like that, the Persians pinned their own infantry, giving up their massive advantage in numbers. Then, just as the cavalry melee was swinging toward the Persians, the Huns sprang from their hiding place. All of a sudden, the Persians' right flank was in disarray. They were falling back. But no matter, there was still time to rally them. The left flank was still doing well. They'd pushed the Romans beyond the trench line. They were pursuing the Roman cavalry almost to the walls of Dara itself. But the rest of the Persian army was still where it had begun. There was a huge gap between the immortals who had chased the Byzantine cataphracts and the infantry that had never moved. The Persian cavalry had chased the Byzantines so far that they were now behind enemy lines, and their infantry was way too far away to support them. The Roman cavalry reserve charged. The main Byzantine cavalry rallied. The immortals were surrounded, cut off. Discipline fell apart. Each man tried to hew his way out, but one by one they fell. And now the Byzantines, having the only cavalry left on the field, knew it was their turn to ride the Persians down. No Sassanid commander would be bathing in Dara that day. This victory paved the way for peace in the east. The empire would still have to pay dearly for it, 11,000 pounds of gold, but now the southeastern border could be secured, and Justinian could turn to the west.
I love that shit, right? Belisarius is so badass. He's literally like, start give him a pen and just start to write in paper like, what should I do? Okay, maybe I should do this. Let's dig in trench. This way they'll not risk their infantry. So we'll literally cut off their army in a large number, and we'll do divide and conquer, basically. This is so brilliant. He just sent light infantry behind those, just immortals, whatever they were called, right? And just basically like, that's so good. While infantry of, persons are just standing there, right? He just made this a gamble, right? For Persians. Like, what should we do? Should we charge the infantry and everyone? They just played it safe there. Let's just send immortals. That was a mistake.
Now, following our pattern, this is where you might expect me to tell you of Belisarius' flaws, but by all accounts, he was a stand-up guy. So instead, I'm going to tell you about a historian who was Belisarius' legal advisor and came on all of his campaigns, a fellow named Procopius. Procopius is our principal source for Justinian's reign. By being with Belisarius, he had a front row seat to almost every major event. His work is thorough and comprehensive. It's a historian's dream. Thanks to him, the reign of Justinian is perhaps one of the best documented periods in Byzantine history. But, and here's where it gets wild, in the 1600s, in an archive in the Vatican Library, there was found a book, a hidden secret book, called The Secret History, also by Procopius. And while Procopius's official histories paint the reign of Justinian as glorious with a handful of failings mixed in, his secret history talks of Justinian as a monster. And I don't mean like a figurative monster, I mean a demonic creature that could pop off its head and wander the palace headless late at night. It depicts Theodora as debauched and depraved, and spares no one in Justinian's inner circle. Now, today, most historians see Procopius's principal histories as highly valuable, and regard the secret history as little more than slander from some noble who was angered by the way Justinian eroded the power of the nobility. But where else will you find a secret history hidden away for centuries, penned by the same guy who served as the glowing chronicler of the reign, filled with—
Oh my god. Imagine the secret history is true, and everything we know about Romans and Byzantine is completely false, and everything the Bible says and basically every biblical things are true. Imagine if that's the case. Obviously there's no evidence of it, but imagine if that's the case, and we just like, oh, look at the secret history. Wow, that's just some bullshit. That's a propaganda. Some noble got angry and just paid him. The main history is the real one. But imagine if that's secret history. The main history is just Justinian threatening him, so he's just writing what Justinian wants. But in reality, he was this demon figure that can pop out his head. What if that was fucking true? I know that's stupid, but it's just funny to think about. And knowing how badass and how chad lots of Roman emperors were, right? And the kind of feat they did, right? I mean, I saw the whole Roman history by, the Doherty and many other videos. Seeing that just makes me think like, okay, how can they pull off this kind of a chad things? What is Roman bred differently? What if this was the case? I know that is so stupid, right? Whenever we find something that is ridiculous, we find something that is extraordinary, different from everybody else, our mind usually goes to the ridiculous answers. But yeah, this is just funny. Somebody should make a TV show out of this. It's just fictional show, but fuck it, why not? Since there's an actual book from that time exists, and it was found in Vatican archives, right? That would make lots of this sci-fi mystery writers, they would just wet their pants just knowing that like this was found in some secret Vatican archives, secret history. That is some next level shit. And seriously, what is the thing with this around that time people? This is like their pastime, is that it? We watch Netflix and we watch some mystery and a horror TV show. They didn't have that, so they just made up history, right, by writing shit right, like this. And I'm gonna put this in secret archive. One day somebody will discover it, and it will be just awesome and thriller. I don't know. This is ridiculous.
With demons and monsters and the most slanderous critique, nothing in the reign of Justinian and Theodora was done small. Sorry we didn't quite get to talking about the demes like I promised last time, but there's just so much going on within the first few years of Justinian's reign.
Yeah,
Don't you
demon
worry
and
though,
everything.
next time,
What if the plague, Justinian plague, was God's answer to kill the demon Justinian or something? Yeah, I love it. I love when history becomes more spicy by stupid science fiction. But yeah. What if somebody wrote that later on, not during this time, but very later on, put it in the Vatican archive, just named that it is written by same people? You would think that you see the change of writing, but not really. You think people didn't know how to I guess copy the writing even then, right? What if this was the time around Renaissance? Somebody actually copied this and put it in the Vatican archives, thinking, one day somebody would find this and they would think this is from the same guy. Well, people, that was awesome. I'm loving this series so far, Byzantine Empire. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.